Hashem, today's daf is Zevachim daf Tzadivav, Zevachim 96. Today's daf Yomi, we're going to start on top of 96a. So the Gemara says, well, now that we've established, we've been discussing the halacha that the Torah tells us you have to break the utensils, the clay utensils that had absorbed the flavor of the kodshim in them. Well, if that's the case, yes, the Gemara, but we just established that a kli cheres can be kashered. So it can be kashered by.
You want to record? Oh, you want to record this?
It's being recorded. Yeah, thank you for the reminder, but it's being recorded. So the Gemara now wants to know why, since you can kasher a furnace, since you can kasher something by putting it into a hot oven, why don't we just put it into a furnace or a kiln? And now Rashi explains that in the Mishkan, they couldn't build it. So that's why they had to break the utensils. They couldn't build a furnace because they're always moving around. But here in the base of Mikdash, they could do it. K'deru shel Mikdash, as opposed to the Mishkan. Amai Yisha Beiru. Why do they have to break them? Now, Adrenal Kivshanos, why don't they stick them back into the furnace? And then when they're in the furnace, they can be kosher again. Like we just said, that if from the inside, you could kosher it. On the outside, you can't kasher from the heat from the outside, but internal heat, it's okay. Amar Bezerah. So the answer is Lafishainos and Kivshonos B'Yerushalayim. They didn't make furnaces in Jerusalem, and the reason is Rashi says because of the smoke. It would blacken the walls of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem's a holy place, so therefore we couldn't do that. Amar Abaye. So Abaye says Mechiosin Ashpasos Bazara. Abaye says, well, what are you talking about? Do you make what are you supposed to do with all these broken utensils? You just break them and you have the broken pottery pieces all over the place there? Is that what you're supposed to do? Rashi says. So the Gemara says, Abaye forgot he forgot that Shemaiah had taught in Kalnavo. So here he's called Shemaiah, but he's really named, he's a Rebbe, Rav Shemaiah, in the place called Kanavo. He forgot what he had taught. That what had he taught? That one of the miracles of the base of Mikdash was Shivrei Klicharis Nivlan Bimkoma. That was a miracle that the broken pottery shards were absorbed right there into their place, and so therefore you don't have to worry about making a garbage collection of the pottery shards because they were absorbed right there. Gemara says, Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avua, without which Rav Nachman says the name of Rabba bar Avua, Tanur Shal Mikdash Shal Matechas Have Nave Decheres Deseko B'Mifnimhu. So that which we had said, that we said on yesterday's daf, that the ovens in the temple were made out of metal, so that you could kasher them each time. And now that we've established that you can kasher a kli cheres if it's burnt on the inside, so if that's the case, why don't you just make the oven out of clay and you can kasher it on the inside? So Gemara says, no, keeping the iko shtei lechem aponim nafiyasam etanor, because the two loaves of bread on Shavuos and the lechem aponim and the bread every Shabbos, that they were not, since they don't require oil, so they didn't have to get put into a kli sheres beforehand, which is where the flour is mixed with the oil. And so therefore, they were kneaded and arranged outside, and then they were brought in and baked directly in the oven of the temple. And so therefore, the oven is being mekadesh them. So if that's the case, kedushas and metanor havile, they were becoming holy and sanctified in the tanur itself. And now the Gemara tells us that and so therefore, havile klisheres, the oven of the mikdash was actually a klisheres, a sanctifying utensil. Klisheres techaris lo avdinan, and we don't make klisheres out of clay. That's what the Gemara tells us. Va'afilu Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda lo ka'amar el da'etz, and even Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda allows a klisheres to be not from clay. He allows it Excuse me, even Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, who allows the klisharis, even if it's not metal, he only allows wood over the cheresol, but nobody allows a klisharis out of clay. Nobody allows that. And there, the Gemara and Rashi tells us that Masechah Sukkah, it's learned out from a pasuk, and at the beginning, at the end of Masechah Sukkah. So the Gemara says, Rav Yitzchak Bar Yehuda have a ragil kamei de Rami Bar Chama. So Rav Yitzchak Bar Yehuda used to typically go and study with Rami Bar Chama, and Shavke Ba'azal Rav Sheshes. So he left and he went to study with Rav Sheshes. So Chad Yom Achad Pagabe. One day, Rav Yitzchak Bar Yehuda met Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama met Rav Yitzchak Bar Yehuda. Amar Lei. So Rami Bar Chama said to Rav Yitzchak Bar Yehuda, Alakapta Nakdan. So he says to him, Alakapta Nakdan Recha Asela Yad. The Alakapta Rashi says is a duchus, i.e., a senior bureaucrat. He says, so he says basically that you grabbed hold of me in my hand and I smell the kingdom on you, because basically you're so close and that you want to stand with the muckety mucks now, and so now I smell the kingdom on your hand. I smell the government, the seat of power. So mishum da azulchach kamei Rav Sheshes havlach Rav Sheshes. You think just because you went to study with Rav Sheshes, now you're like Rav Sheshes? Meaning he was rebuking his student for leaving him and going to Rav Sheshes. Amar le lav mishum hachimar. No, it's not because I want to get to like the position of authority. But Mar Kibaina Milsa Pashle Mitzvah. But when I ask the Rebbe a question, when I ask you, Rav Yitzchak Bar Yehuda, you answer me a question with logic. Ki Mishkachna Masnisa Parchola. And then if I find a Brisa or a Mishnah or a Tosefta, I'm able to challenge your logic, and your logic goes away. But Rav Sheshes Kibaina Milsa. When I ask a question from Rav Sheshes Kibaina Milsa Minei Pashli Mi Masnisa. He gives me a source. He gives me a Brisa, Tosefta. He knows everything, and so he knows all the sources. The chinam mishkachnu masnisa uparcha masnisa. And then even if I find the source against it, it's one source against another, and his argument still stands. And Rashi says shemishnayos seduros b'fiv. The Rav Sheshes knew all the mishnayos, like we said in Erevin. Rav Chisda merachshin shvosel mimasnisin de Rav Sheshes. Basically, that Rav Chisda would be afraid. He would be in awe of the all the brisas that Rav Sheshes knew. So then the Gemara continues. So Rami Bar Chama says, well, if that's the case, says, go ask me a question. You can ask me a question, and I'll answer it to you logical. And the if shalach kimas nisa, and I'll answer the question. And when you find it, you'll find that there's a brisa that says just like me. So he says, he challenges him. This is similar to when Ilfa challenged everybody in the end of Maseches Tainus, when after he left the yeshiva, he said, I'm going to stand on the edge of the ship, and you can ask me any question from a Tanaitic source. So to here also, Rami Bar Chama says, ask me a question. But the difference is, Ilfa passed the test. Rami Bar Chama unfortunately did not, because we'll see what happened. So Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yehuda asked him the question, Bisha b'mikzas klitan mariko shtifa. So let's say he cooked only in a portion of the kli. Bishul b'mikzas kli. Does the whole utensil require mariko shtifa, the special cleaning required of kachim utensils? Oh, ainton, or does it not require it? Meaning he only cooked in a portion of it. Amar Lei says to him, midei avazah. So Rav Bar Chama says, isn't it like when some blood gets on it, and there, even though blood gets on only a small portion of it, he doesn't have to clean the whole thing. Where it says, but Rabbi Yitzchak said to Rami Bar Chama, but we don't find a brisa like you. Amar Lei. So Rami Bar Chama says, I don't need a brisa. Mistabra, it's logical that the halacha is like a beged, like a garment. Ma beged enoton kibus ela makom madam. Just like a garment, the only place that requires kibus is the place of the blood itself. Also, utensil, the only place it requires mariko and shtifa is the place of the cooking itself, and so therefore I don't need a brisa. It's logical. Just the part of the utensil requires the cleaning. Amrulay, so Rabbi Yitzchak said to Rabbi Bachama, "Midami, no, the two cases are not the same. Dam mifafeya, bishul mifafeya, the blood." You get a stain of blood on your garment, it doesn't spread throughout the whole garment. But cooking, when you cook something, the flavor goes throughout the whole utensil. Votanya, and also have a brisa that refutes you. Chomer ba'azami mariko shtifa, that it says that if blood gets on, it's stricter than mariko shtifa, because chomer mariko shtifa mi ba'azah, and there's a stringency of mariko shtifa over azah. Chomer ba'azah, sha'azah yeshna b'chatas achitzonis chatas pnimis. What's the stringency of the azah? That the azah is both by the chatos Panemios and Chatas Chitzonios, meaning it also applies by the inner Chatas, which doesn't apply by Marika and Shtifa because those are never cooked. The inner Chatas. Vieshno if Nezrika, and Hazah applies only before the blood is sprinkled. And so that's when you have to clean it out. Mash Enkim Marika Shtifa, the Marika Shtifa only applies from meat that's cooked, and also not if it's not roy lachila, so therefore it doesn't apply to the ola. So the Gemara says, and chomer b'mariko shtifa, and all it continues in this brisa that the mariko shtifa has a stringency over azash. And mariko shtifa nuages ben b'kachik kachim ben b'kachik kalam. Mariko shtifa applies both by kachik kachim and also kachik kalam, even to shlamim. Bishal b'mitzas akli to mariko shtifa kol akli, and also it says explicitly if you cook in a portion of the utensil, the whole utensil requires it, not like Rabbi Bachama said, Masha Enkin Ba'azah. So on our way, Rabbi Bachama was forced to say, Itanya, Tanya, you have a brisa, you have a brisa. Basically, now we know why a student left him to study with Rav Sheshes. But time of Maya, what's the reason that if you cook in a portion of the utensil, you have to clean out you need marika and shtifa on the whole utensil? Amarkra, the imbekli nechoshes bushla. That bushoa, if it was cooked in a copper utensil, then you have to do marika and shtifa b'mayim, v'afilu b'miktzas kli. So we learn out from that pasuk even a portion of the utensil. Baruch atah. No, I already said the bracha. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, that whether it's kochik kochim or kochik kalim, it requires marika and shtifa. Rabbi Shimon says the kachik kalam do not require marika and shtika. So the Gemara is going to analyze their reasonings. Tana Rabbanan, it says in the pasuk, Zos Torah Tachatas, that you have to clean out any pot that the chatas was cooked in. Ainly ela chatas, I might think only the chatas. Kol kodshim minayin. How do I know any sacred food? Tamalomar kodesh kodashim he. It says from the pasuk it is kodesh kodashim, and that teaches us not just chatas but even kochik kalim are required. And Rashi says don't say it's just excluding kochik kalim, because if that would be the case, the Torah wouldn't have had to write osa, which we'll see is limiting the truma. So the Gemara says yachol shalimar ba'esa truma. I might think also truma, if it was in a pot, it needs mariko shtifa. Tamalomar osa. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. But Rabbi Shimon, remember, Shimon says that kachik kalim does not require mariko shtifa. Rabbi Shimon says kachik kachim tuna mariko shtifa, kachik kalim ain't tuna mariko shtifa. Well, how do we know? D'chsev kodesh kodashim he, kachik kachim in kachik kalim. Well, only kachik kachim requires mariko shtifa, not kachik kalim. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. Why is the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says that he doesn't say Kodesh Kodashim, he limits Kachik Kalim? The Itzrach Osal Mutei Truma, from the fact that the pasuk, as Rashi said, and from the fact that the pasuk says Osa to exclude Truma, Mikal, that one step above Truma is the Kachik Kalim, that's to Unin Mariko Ushtifa, that Kachik Kalim requires it. Rabbi Shimon Amracha Osa, Rabbi Shimon say to you that when it says Osa, it's not coming to that when it says Kachik Kachim, it's coming to exclude Kachik Kalim. And nevertheless, and for sure we learn from this that Truma is also excluded. And if that's the case, why does it say Osa? Kida Amrina. Like and Rashi says, we have to remember what we said back on 93a. Rabbi Shimon used this pasuk back on 93a, that if a portion of the blood of the chatas, which was that if the blood of the chatas was kshera and then became disqualified, and if that's what spilled, then the beged does not require kibus. And you're going to have an osa from a kshera, but not from a psula. So then the Gemara says, wait 1 second, utruma, according to everybody, will buy shtifa marika. Does truma not require shtima marika? Tanya, kadesh abisha babasar, or yivasha bachal. We learned in the brisa, if there's a pot that cooked meat, you cannot allow to cook dairy in it. And bisho, and if you cook dairy in it, but no same time, it's going to be prohibited. If it gives off flavor, truma, or yivasha bachul, and bisho, but no same time. And truma, you can't cook chulin. And if you're cooking it, it's prohibited if it gives off a flavor. And anyway, we see from here, and also if you cook truma, the utensil requires koshering to get rid of the flavor in it. Amar Abai, so he says, yes, truma requires koshering, but not marika shtia. Koshering is called hagoa, where you boil out the flavor, but not marika and shtifa. So what do we say when the Brisa says that the truma does not require marika shtifa? Well, there's a distinction. Marika and shtifa, bishal b'miktzas, klitam marika shtifa, bishal b'miktzas, klitam marika shtifa, kolakli. Truma l'tzarch al makom bishal. Now, truma doesn't require the whole utensil; it only requires the place where the flavor was. And Rava gives a different distinction between marika and shtifa and hagoa. That marika and shtifa can only be done with water. But the kashering, I feel b'yayin, I feel b'mazug, but hagal can be even done with wine or mixed wine. And this is a major discussion in your day whether or not you can kasher with a liquid that's not water. So the Ramah allows it, even though the Shulchan Aruch is strict. The Ramah allows you to kasher something with non-water, with a different liquid, and Ramosha Feinstein allowed under certain circumstances. Rabbi, like in factories where you need to do it. Rabbi Barula Amar Lo Tzricha Ela D'Amar Mar. There's a different distinction between marika and shtifa and hagoa. Marika shtifa b'tzon. And marika shtifa is done with cold water, meaning say after you boil up the utensil in hot water, you need to wash it out with cold water. But truma afilu b'chamin, just do hot water, and you don't need to do marika and shtifa afterwards in cold. The Gemara says that this is a dispute later on in our Gemara. But on tomorrow's daf, that this is good only according to one who says marika shtifa is bitzonen. Well, according to one who says that marika is with hot water and shtifa is bitzonen, ma'iko meimar. Why would we say truma doesn't require marika shtifa? Because also truma requires hagal v'chamin. The Gemara says shtifa yisei rasa. The truma doesn't need the extra washing. That the utensils that require marika shtifa require an extra washing cold water after the hagala, but truma does not require that. Nowadays the minhag is that after you do the hagala, you have to wash it off right away with cold water so that you stop the hagala process. Okay, this today's daf we can